Hello and welcome to the Motogp Xtra podcast. Now, unfortunately, this week we are a couple of days late. We do apologise. Unfortunately, I was on holidays, so you will be listening to this on Wednesday as the day goes out. So apologies. We should be okay for the rest of the season to be on track, but I think out of 34, 35 episodes, this is the first one that's actually been delayed. So for the two of us, we're doing pretty good, but we're going to jump straight in because we have a mega podcast really with all the topics in all classes. There's so much going on, so we're going to jump straight into Moto 3 race. Rhys, what did you find Moto 3 to be like? Did you expect a big pack? Did you expect a couple of years ago with people waiting, tyre wear? There's a bit of everything really with Moto 3, wasn't there?
Yeah, there was, because like you say, tyre wear, that's not something particular they ever really have to think about in Moto 3, very occasionally. But Catalunya is always one of those ones where it's just like just the nature of the track. Obviously, there's quite a lot of high-speed corners that put a lot of load with tyres, of course. The tarmac is notorious for having low grip as well, so it just causes spinning, and it's kind of a snowball effect. But like you say, I kind of was expecting the whole slowing down bit. I didn't think it'd be perhaps quite as bad as when Kobe did it a few years ago. Remember that when he was literally in the lead of the race, he just sat the bike up in front of everybody, and everybody just sat up, and it was like a practice session, and they're like waiting. It was ridiculous. But we saw it throughout the weekend. It was kind of what you'd expect, but actually it was a little bit different. It was a bit of a slow burn, and there wasn't that much. Obviously, there's always action. There's passes going on all the time. You'd never remember every pass going on in a Moto 3 race, but it started off a bit slower, and actually there was kind of a big group at the front that kind of got away from the rest of the pack. It was sort of just the point scorers, pretty much. Might have even been a couple less than that, actually. So it was a bit of a breakaway. It wasn't like a breakaway that we've seen in some of the other races where 4 or 5 get away. It was still a pretty big pack, but it wasn't the whole grid like we've seen at races previously, like Mugello in years gone by, and probably at the circuit as well in the past. Although I do actually remember one race where the leader pulled away. I think Alex Marquez in 2014 was miles clear of the field. I seem to remember that one sticking out quite a bit. But yeah, it was a pretty good race because it started off quite slow, but then it did actually start to ramp up, as it always does. You had your usual suspects involved. You had Dennis Onchu, David Munoz. It's always a crazy race when those guys get involved.
Yeah, it was your typical Moto 3 race. I think nearly every podcast we say it.
We say that phrase
is a bit of bingo.
In every single one. It's a typical Moto 3 race.
But unfortunately, it was a typical Moto 3 race. But as the pack kind of got whittled down, it was just a mega race, really, all the way through the race. There was passes everywhere. For all our kind of giving out about the tyre wear and the really low grip track and it being quite abrasive to the tyres, it didn't really spoil any of the races for us. They were good races throughout the day, and I think the riders were more concerned. Obviously, in the big class we saw a bit of it, but again in Moto 2 we saw a bit, but it didn't really. It kind of brought an extra sparkle to the spectacle. So, in terms of the Moto 3 race, the big pack slowly got whittled down towards the end. When we got the last 3, 4, 5 laps, really it was anyone's game, Rhys, wasn't it?
Yeah, it really was. I mean, it is just one of those things. Moto 3 is a bit luck of the draw. Obviously, over the course of the season, the top riders get in the top positions more of the time because they position their bikes better. They do things better in battle. But sometimes you actually get things pretty unexpected. And to be honest, starting that last lap, Danny Holgado was leading the race, if I'm not mistaken. And he ends up on the deck at turn 10. I mean, of course, that can happen in any race, even from the lead. But just the way he got shuffled back through the pack was just something we've not seen from him this year. He's been very, very good at keeping to the front of the packs and always being the guy that sort of makes the passes in the right place. Or in some races, he's maybe not at the pace of the top guys, but just sort of sits on the back of the group and maybe picks up a couple at the end. But he was sort of mugged off this time. He kind of had Messier went past him. I think Rueda went past him, Onchu went past him, Munoz went past him, and then of course down towards turn 10. It was an odd crash. I still don't really know why he kind of fell off. I don't know if it was just on the first touch of the throttle. He was very tight into turn 10. I think perhaps trying to get the cutback on the rider, and the rear just came around on him, and Danny went, and it's massive for the championship because he's been very, very consistent up until this point. Of course, he had a non-score in Assen, but that's basically his only bad weekend so far. And since then, Messia's had a couple of bad weekends. Messier, who was having a really good run of form at that point. But he's changed the championship because it's now allowed Sasaki to close it so much. But it's a rare thing you see from Holgado, and just rare to see someone drop back so much in the last lap, but without being bashed out of the way, if that makes any sense. You see riders drop through the pack all the time on the last lap when, someone like Onchi or Munoz gives them a bit of a helping hand. But he was just getting overtaken by people. So I really don't know what happened. It's almost as if, maybe he didn't have as much tyre left as some of the others on the last lap. Potentially that could have been something that played a part in it, because like we said, even in Moto3, there was a little bit of tyre wear risk.
Yeah, it was strange, because you do mention that you have your riders who usually you can get picked up quite easily in the last 2 or 3 laps in Moto3, and it can ruin your race. You get shuffled back, but it wasn't really the case for Holgado. He just was getting past. He was maybe a bit tight, maybe a bit tentative. Throughout the whole weekend, I did notice that he wasn't the Holgado we had seen for the first half of the season. It felt like his limit was maybe top 8, top 6 maybe. So when he was there and when he was leading the race, you felt, right, he's going above where he's gone all weekend, so there's always an element of risk. If a rider is in the top 6, top 8 all weekend, but not top 3, top 2, whatever, if he's leading the race, you have it in the back of your mind, you're kind of thinking, well, he hasn't shown this pace all race weekend, and I know the battling and all that can come into, but you always think to yourself, how close to the limit is that just to be there? And with Holgado, we found out really, and maybe dirty track. We talk about the track a lot. Maybe he just turned it tight onto a bit of track that wasn't as rubbered as he expected, but it was a real weird one, because even when we watch it back, it just spins out on him. It's a very, very computer track completely. So when he just slides off, you think to yourself, did I just really see that? And with all the last couple of corners and the last lap and everything that happened with Anchu, and we'll get to him in a minute, you actually don't even realise that Holgado went down until they kind of went back and showed, and you realise he didn't score. You would imagine Holgado crashing out as a championship leader with 5 corners to go would have been like cameras panning to him. We didn't even see it until like the replays. It was a strange little end to the race, but he's going to have to bounce back from that. And I think really he's quite lucky that Messia had the mechanical in Austria and crashed out the lead in Silverstone, because that could have been big trouble. Otherwise, he would have been right back into the fold. And of course, Sasaki, again, another rider who you'd expect at a nice flowing track. You'd expect him to go really well there, and he was kind of a bit underperforming all weekend, and most of the race he was in about P8. And again, you kind of want to be top 4, top 3, top 4, just so you have a bit of an idea of where the top part of the group is. You just want to be towards the front. You don't really want to be P8. You can get someone, not going to name names, but riders that probably aren't meant to be in that front group, and they're using a bit of slipstream and a bit of hope and dreams to be there. You can get taken out. We've seen it through Garcia's winning year. We've seen it through Arenas' winning year. We've seen it. You can name every champion that's had.
Garcia had one.
Or not Garcia, the other one, his teammate, Guevara. I was thinking of Guevara, and I said Garcia, of course. He came very close until he started imploding, but throughout nearly every championship ride from every rider that's won a Moto3 championship, when they have the weeks where they're slightly lower down and they're around people that they're probably not meant to be at, you're just a little bit nervous. And if I was Sasaki, I know he's not really probably thinking about the championship at the moment, because he's had a rough season again, really, considering how quick he's been, and the fact that I kind of bang on about him quite a bit, how fast he is, but he just doesn't really seem to. It never materialises him. He always ends up in the wrong position at the wrong time.
He kept crashing, didn't he, at the start of the season?
That's exactly.
2 races in a row, he crashed out of like P2.
So,
in fact, I think he crashed out the lead in one of them. He took the lead at Texas, didn't he? And just high-sided, like.
Yeah, and he was going way over. I think he wasn't like the fastest man on track in Argentina. He crashed.
Yeah, that's easier done because it was wet.
Yeah, but still, there's he seemed to have he has form for kind of not getting what he has all weekend to the finish line, shall we say, or getting at least in the position he's in.
Let's not forget the first episode of this podcast.
Yeah, exactly. High side breaks the fairing, and Jesus ruins the season really, because that kind of gave it a bit of a hangover for the rest of the flyaways at the start, and then it just went all tits up from, unfortunately. But just in Sunday's race, it was just everyone that you expected to be at Catalunya, the usual duo or 3 will come to the front, and we'll expect to see an arm battle, and it all went out the window because Messia nearly did a double Valentino into the last corner. Holgado crashed in the last lap. Sasaki was being Sasaki, and Anchu was being Anchu. So we kind of got like everyone's bingo in really, and we got a full house really of everybody's name and doing the usual. So it was a weird one, but I suppose we should probably segue on to Anchu now. Reckless, or was it a racing incident?
Reckless. Of course, it was reckless.
I have to pose the question. It was no.
Yeah, I know. No, I can see, like he didn't actually do anything egregious in terms of the way he took the corner. He was on the perfect line, taking the corner fine. But the problem is when someone's like slow in front of you, you don't ride through them.
Yeah.
Like I don't know what he was thinking. Like I can understand him not wanting to shut the throttle because it's going to cost him a place at the run to the line. But it's like you can't just ride into someone. It's like on the road, right? In real life, it's like if someone pulled out on you at a junction or a roundabout, it's like something like that. It might be their fault that they're in the wrong place and they pulled out, but you can't just drive into them and and say, "Well, I didn't do anything wrong. I was just driving along." You've got to try and avoid the accident as well. So it's like it wasn't really Munoz's fault that he got sort of pushed wide. He had two people at the inside of him into a corner where being overtaken by one person is like the most exciting thing that's ever happened at the circuit. And then Onshu just tries to ride through. Onshu does the GP bikes thing and just tries to ride through him. I really don't know what he was thinking. I mean, I understand that he obviously didn't want to lose time, but you can't just ride through people. I mean, I also have the other side of it. It's like Munoz. He can't, when you kind of ride the way Munoz does, it does mark your card and you do get it back eventually. But in that instance, it wasn't even like he went for an aggressive pass. He literally just rode through the guy and knocked him off, which was very dangerous because the speed difference, obviously, the last corner, if he'd fell off into the track, he could have got hit or you could have hit him or something. It's just on shoe. Like, we were really impressed with him, weren't we, the last couple of weekends in terms of the fact he seemed to have kind of got over these stupid mistakes, but he just decided to accelerate into the side of somebody today. Well, not today, but you know what I mean. In that race.
I've watched it back a few times, and of course they showed it loads because at the time it happened, I wasn't sure was it just two lines merging, but obviously we looked.
I didn't even realize it was on shoe at first. I saw it live. I thought it was Rueda. But...
I saw that it was Munoz that crashed, but I didn't know who it was. You just see exit stage left. Into
I knew Munoz was one that went down. I thought it was the other eye that hit him, but yeah.
When I was watching back, I watched it back a few times just because, again, any big instance, we try and give our thoughts on it, and I like to have at least watched it from his multiple angles, so when I give my opinion, I'm not kind of leaving anything on the table. I feel like he was trying to do the Miguel Oliveira last turn at Austria all them years ago, where the three boys in his case in front, in Onshu's case, go into the corner.
Trying to do what he did the last race then.
Yeah, just take massive corner speed and fly past them to line and run to line. I can see what he's tried. He's just been a bit foolish in thinking that Mugnot's not going to come back to the race line, or he's just going to teleport to somewhere else. You have to give them some sort of leeway in that he's going to come back. You can't expect him to run wide, pick the bike up. Oh, there's going to be other people come through. He's still in the position. You have to overtake cleanly. It's letter of the law. Like, you're behind, you have to overtake cleanly. And his penalty put him back down to P12, P13. So he lost out quite early from it. And I think it was a fair penalty because it wasn't needed. If he rolls and tries to just take a tighter line slightly, he probably beats him to the line. Like, he still probably gets that. So I don't know. In his head, he probably still thinks he can win it. It's on you. Like, so sometimes the brain doesn't always match what we see on the bike. So it was an interesting one, but from someone who's probably, again, wrecked more of his championship, he probably wasn't really in the championship, Onshu, really. He's had too many crashes, too many mistakes, too many Onshu moments, shall we say. But someone who's kind of back in it, maybe. We did mention him already. Messiah, is his championship back on, do you reckon? Maybe?
Possibly. He's definitely got a sort of a better chance than he did going into the race, because once again, he rode very well. It was a circuit where the Honda was working quite well, circuit where he was going quite well, and P2 was it in the end? Yeah, of course it was, because he didn't get knocked off, Munoz did. But he had to go for that win. He just missed out, but like we said before, you can't win every Moto3 race in a season. Even if you are the best guy, you're not going to win them all because of just the way it pans out. But he positioned himself up there. He was at the front the whole time. He led on that final lap briefly. Obviously got beat. Let's be honest as well, he's on the inferior bike compared to his rivals. Yes, if you're going to be on a Honda, the Leopard Honda's the one to be on. And if you're going to be on a Leopard Honda, yes, be the number one rider in the team, because you are going to probably up there week in, week out. We've seen it over the years with Foggia and Messiah himself when he was on the bike previously, and it is the Honda to be on, but it's clearly not the bike to have. You'd rather be on a KTM, and he's he's done a really good job. I've been very impressed with him, like the whole season. Really, his only blip for me, obviously, there was Silverstone, which was a shame because again, corner speed track, he could have won that, but it was a little mistake. But really, it was a shame what happened to him in Termas as well. But other than those two races, he's been very good this season. It's not really the kind of season we've seen from Messier before. He's usually a bit hit and miss, but he's been up there sort of every round. It seems like he really gets on the Leopard Honda, and I think, I don't see why he hasn't got a shot at the championship. I have more faith in him bringing it home than Foggia, to be honest, in the previous seasons, because he seems to be there week in, week out. He doesn't have these weekends where it's nowhere. Now, it's going to be difficult because Holgado, again, has only really had 2 bad rounds, so that kind of it's difficult to gain points back on him. Sasaki's really fast every weekend, so whilst, yes, I think mathematically it's still on because, again, it's Moto3. Holgado could very easily get knocked off in another race and Messier wins at something and he's suddenly back in it. We saw, actually, in 2021 how that big gap from Acosta to Foggia was sort of whittled down in a couple of races, so it can happen, but it's going to be a tough ask for him, but definitely more possible now. Obviously, it makes up for his obviously unfortunate incident at Austria, which obviously wasn't his fault with the mechanical.
Yeah, the biggest issue for me with Messier, like again, you touched brilliantly on the fact that I think no one has ever questioned his talent or his outright speed. It's just whether he'll bring it home or whether he'll be able to do it for 6 rounds in a row instead of doing it twice among them 6 rounds. He's always been quick throughout the class. He's gone missing most seasons for a period, and that's kind of why he's probably left to Leopard in the first place, then gone back to them. He's been so highly rated and then not performed to do what probably most people in the paddock believe he can do. And this season, I just feel like he just doesn't have the equipment, and he's probably riding better than he ever has. He's been like, we'll take out a rain crash, we'll take that out because it can happen to anyone, and then we take out the mechanical of Austria. That's 1 DNF. That's less than your current championship leader in Holgado. So really, you just think that yes, he's quick enough. We all know the talent is there. It's just, for me right now, between the end of the season now, is he going to be able to beat the KTMs? And I just don't think he can. And that's nothing against him. I think it's a direct manufacturer issue, Honda versus KTM. I just don't think he's going to be able to do it with the Honda. I think he'll probably win races throughout the season, and I think he'll be thereabouts. Now, if Holgado implodes, he's crashed through the last 4 rounds or whatever, so he's having a bit of a rough patch. Sasaki again is Sasaki, just don't know about him. So there's the three amigos kind of going down to the wire for this title. So they all have their weaknesses. Messia's weaknesses is equipment mainly. I think this year he's eradicated most of his mistakes. Of course, the Silverstone blip was unfortunate because if he gets another 2 laps of his what he called qualifying laps, if he does that, he probably breaks the field, probably wins that race. If we throw another 25 points onto his championship to where he is now, we'd be saying that he's well in the hunt. So it's going to be difficult for him, but I definitely think he has a chance. My only lingering doubt is whether the equipment is good enough to go up against all them KTMs and Gasgas and Husqvarnas over the remaining 9-10 rounds of the season. So it's going to be, if he put it this way, right, if he wins this championship, it will be one of the more special Moto3 championships because he's been so up against it in terms of equipment. Foggia couldn't do it for 2 or 3 seasons. He had a go at it. Again, 1 races, but like you said, he went missing. There was rounds, I think was it last year, where he was back with like Scott Ogden, and like you can't really be back with a rookie on the same equipment. He just goes. He went missing a couple of times in them championships. Of course,
he'd be down like 17th some weekends. Like exactly. I think that happened to Jerez. I think Scott was at the top Honda, and I think he was like about 12th, and Foggia was like 17th. So it was like
he just had too many mistakes, and as well as the fact he'd go missing, which in a championship challenger you just can't have. Like we saw. Perfect example of Holgado not having the pace this weekend, but was leading onto the last lap. Now, of course, he crashed, and that was unfortunate, but we didn't see Foggia do that over the last 2 seasons when he was on the Honda. So the fact that Messi is there week in, week out is props to him. And I think, is he going to be in Moto2 next year? I think there's a couple of rumours that he is going up. I think if he does,
he is. He's going up with SAG.
Oh, SAG, so there you go. It's his last chance at it. So.
Petronas. Not Petronas, but Mandalika.
Mandalika. Yeah, so he's last chance at it, I suppose. So it's going to be tough for him. But he's probably the one I'd been willing on because I have liked him. I've always thought he's such a good rider. It's just a shame that he's had these flaws that he's somehow managed to eradicate this year. Maybe with Foggia lead, maybe with the kind of spotlight gone off Foggia out of the team. Maybe it's back in his corner. I don't know what the difference is. Maybe it's just another year. It's just clicked for him. So it'd be interesting. But moving on to our race winner, David Alonso wins again. 2 wins in 2 visits to Spain, if I remember correctly, Rhys. Oh no, he's P2. Sorry, P2.
No,
was sorry. It was his
first.
first.
Yeah, in Jerez, it was his first podium. His first win was at Silverstone.
Yeah,
but yeah, 2 wins out of the last 3 races. Crashed out of the lead of the other one.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a very. It was a weird crash that was again as well.
Yeah.
It didn't look like he did a lot wrong. To try not to say the famous phrase, but it didn't look like he made much of a mistake. And he's come from quite far back. He kind of is one of those riders. He fights his way through. He's a bit of a. Well, I'll say he's a bit of a Munoz type in terms of that he's always there come race day, but he's a bit cleaner than Munoz. And clearly, like I'm going to say here, he's clearly going to be the favourite for the championship next year, I would imagine. I mean, he could technically still win it this year, but it's probably not going to happen because he's. Obviously, it took him a while to sort of get up to speed. I can't remember where I saw it somewhere. Was saying that he had a tough start to the season, and he was like 8th in his second race. Like he's been pretty good the whole time. So yeah, you can't expect it ever. Like you never really expect him to win because he doesn't qualify that well, but he just comes through and he just seems to have some really fantastic racecraft. I mean, this is a rider who is a rookie this season, but realistically should have gone up previously. It was just the fact that the Gas team was so stacked previously, of course, with the Guevara and Garcia, the top 2 riders of last year. Neither of those obviously were going to move aside for him, so David had to stay in the CV Championship for an extra season, but it doesn't seem like it's done him any harm. It's a bit further development, working with the team, probably having a bit of a closer integration. Then if he did do a couple of wild cards, he's definitely done a couple of replacements as well before in the past for injured riders in that team. So yeah, it just his rookie season's just been amazing. I mean, it's not quite an Acosta season, but you're never going to get that really. It's very, very rare. That's like a once in a sort of lifetime, once in a generation kind of rookie season. This one is a fantastic rookie season. 2 wins in your first year is just unbelievable. And just the way he goes about it, like I said, he's not, he's an aggressive rider, but he's fair with it. He's not one of those riders that you think's a bit dangerous or he just really, I've kind of run out of words to say about him. He's just a fantastic rider, super, super fast. Maybe struggles with the one lap a little bit, but again, that's something that comes in as you stay in the class a bit longer. We've seen that in the past. I think some of the other riders as well that weren't so good in qualifying to begin with have sort of found the way in it. But yeah, just another fantastic win for him. Played it perfectly. That sort of dive into the last corner with Messia up his inside as well was just something really special. And of course, I do feel sorry for Munoz kind of getting a bit screwed over by it, but that's just what happens. And he very easily could have been overtaken by Messia. Just to thread the needle like that was just amazing. And of course, to go with the win from Silverstone, had the blip in Austria, but ever since we've come back from the summer break, Alonso has been on fire. Yeah,
the thing I really like about him is that over the last couple of years in the championship, I think Garcia was good at it. Guevara obviously was quite good at it. When you get about 4 laps to go, certain riders just have a very good kind of trait of being in 3rd position when they mightn't have been there all race. When you have them group races and you're going from 3rd to 9th and back to 6th and you're down at 11th. Last couple of laps, they just seem to find themselves in a good position and it's like a nice poker hand going into the last 3 laps of the race. And I think Alonso really has a good knack at that, getting into the little pockets of space with a couple of laps to go. He seems to have done it well again here, that he's in the group, and a Moto3 race is a Moto3 race. Any one of them could win it, but he just has that knack of being there, and that just increases your chance. And his racecraft, like you mentioned, is second to none really. So whatever happened, maybe he went away for the summer break and just kind of reflected on season, just kind of took a step back to take 2 forward in a way, but he's definitely been really impressive. Now, of course, like I said, podium in Jerez was his first, getting P2 there. A Spanish rider. I know he's technically Colombian, but Spanish Colombian will say he did really well at the Spanish rounds this season. So he's building nicely, and again, I can't really disagree that next year he will be the man with the kind of hopes of going all the way to championship, unless another rookie comes along and does something silly again next year. Because we've had Acosta, and we've had Eisen Guevara, and over Alonso, and we have Munoz and stuff. There's just so many. They're just churning.
Well, really, like,
exactly,
rookie last year, so
they're just being churned out in Spain at the moment, and it's Spain are really going through a golden kind of shower of riders coming through, and a golden kind of just path of them getting into the premier classes of the GP and stuff like that. So I think in maybe we're in 2023 now, give it maybe 6 years, maybe go 2028, 2029, it'll probably be all them fighting for the top spots in GP on the factory, whatever it may be. Then it could be factory MVs and factory KTMs and factory Husqvarnas and factory Ducatis. Then it mightn't be the Japanese bikes anymore, as we've seen they've tailed off. But he's just been phenomenal this year, and really he's going to go far. And I hope when he does make the move to Moto2, he just is ready for it, because I feel like Guevara this year has just been completely outmatched. He just doesn't have I just feel like he's probably not meant to be there yet. I think when they go up so early and they win the championship so early, everyone's like, get him up. They can do that straight away on a Moto2 bike. And I think maybe Guevara could have probably stayed. I don't think he was personally... I don't think, judging by his performances, he was ready to be in Moto2. He definitely has struggled now. Maybe he's someone that will benefit a lot from the Pirelli switch. But that was a bad career move for him so far, because he's really struggled. But again, going back to Alonso, can't fault him. Was brilliant on Sunday, and I look forward to watching him throughout the season, because he will probably be on this podcast again at some point of winning races. He's been pretty special. Now we're going to move on to the lightweight middle class of Moto2. Arbolino, disastrous round. Is that fair to say, Rhys?
Yeah, his season has just dropped off a cliff. It's been pretty bad since
Texas,
since Mugello, really. Like, Mugello was the last good run I can think of for him. Obviously, he was second place there behind Acosta. It was almost as if that was just sort of the last blow. Obviously, he's had a lot of stuff going on in the background. You know, after the first couple of races, he was sort of linked to all the MotoGP seats. Obviously, the Gresini seat's still up in the air, but seemingly hasn't got that, or at least doesn't seem like he's definitely going to get it, because he's signed for obviously Mark BDS. Usually in these contracts, they do have clauses that are like, oh, if they get a MotoGP team offering, they can go. But with him sort of being confirmed with Mark BDS, kind of suggests that's probably gone out the window. All the rumours have kind of died down, so that probably affects him a bit as well, because obviously he's had all that going on in the background. And then, of course, you're going to be disappointed that you've ended up with the MotoGP ride. He's had a Costa sort of pummeling him this whole time as well, winning races, bringing all those points back on him. And what was a pretty decent championship lead at one point, about race wins worth, just been whittled down, and now he's quite far adrift himself. But it's just been getting worse and worse. He was just awful this weekend. He just hadn't got any pace the whole time. To be fair, his start was pretty good. I will give him that. His first lap was very good, because he was 20th on the grid, and he was about 11th by the end of the first lap. But he slowly dropped back through. I thought maybe he'd be able to sort of then try and go with the lead riders and stick there, because he's just behind his teammate Sam, and I thought maybe that he'd be able to stick on the back of Sam, but no, he just dropped back through the pack again. So yeah, I feel like he's completely sort of lost at this point. Similar kind of thing we saw to Vietti last year, where he started off amazingly. All these rumours about, could he end up in MotoGP? You know, Vietti was tied to obviously VR46. Of course, he was there, but so if the seat doesn't open up there, could he end up on another Ducati, like a Gresini Ducati or something? And then all of a sudden, it kind of falls apart, and he starts making mistakes. Now, to be fair, Arbolino hasn't started crashing out of races like Vietti started to do, but the weak performance is still there. And I don't see it doesn't seem to be turning around anytime soon. He'll probably get to a round where it's a bit better, suits his riding style a bit more. Perhaps a wet race or something might help him out, build his confidence, pick him back up. But with Acosta kind of got a bit. Well, I suppose we'll talk about him later. But Acosta didn't have the best round he could have done in the race in the end, which I guess helps Arbolino a bit. But yeah, I would say, I will go as far to say that his championship challenge is completely over at this point, even though the gap is obviously still surpassable, especially if Acosta's crashes or is out for a period of time, which of course can happen. Not that you want it to, but it can. Or just a single DNF or retirement, something like that could bring him back into it. But yeah, just didn't have any pace, didn't look comfortable, hasn't looked himself since the summer break. Even before was sort of slow at Assen as well. Just seems like that defeat in Mugello, and then all the MotoGP stuff coming together, him just finally losing the championship lead. I think it's all just sort of got on top of him, and I think it's just he's just in a bit of a rut at the moment. But it's kind of similar to last year in a way, because he had this a little bit in the last season. He'd be really good at some rounds and kind of nowhere in some of the other ones.
Yeah, he is a bit hot and cold, unfortunately, and like come into the season, we didn't really think he'd be a championship contender at the level of Acosta has been. So it was kind of like when Vietti, we were like, oh, we're kind of surprised he's here, and we're expecting him to kind of tail off, and it has happened. And again, I think he has another season or two in Moto2 to kind of file off them rough edges and just improve the rider. Unfortunately for him, unfortunately, depending on what way you want to look at this, is that when he started performing, there was a GP seat available from him, and that definitely, no matter who you are, that definitely takes your focus. And you're like, we always hear that during talks. Imagine FP1 for Moto2, and then in between that and trying to set up a bike for a race weekend, you're having meetings with teams, and your manager's on the phone saying, oh, well, so-and-so has said that they're keen to have you on the bike for X, Y, and Z, and this is the sort of thing we're thinking. You're not thinking about your race weekend, and you're thinking the next 3, 4, 5 years down the line what this could mean for you. So it's only fair that he kind of a bit slack, that his eye is probably slightly taken off the ball. And I think as Acosta has caught him and passed him, I think he's put him under a bit more pressure. He's probably tried to slightly override, and is probably put, like the common phrase of he's probably trying too hard to get results, whereas he probably just needs a little go back, like I said a while ago, for someone to take a step back and 2 forward. Like I said for Alonso, that he just is probably trying so hard. And at a track like this, where you have to be patient, you have to respect your tires, and that's probably what his whole issue was, and that's probably why he had such a good start, is that he just pushed from the start and ruined his race and went backwards. So overall, I do agree his season is just tailing off, and his championship challenge now is gone. And I think he did well and put himself in the shop window for long enough this season to be there. I didn't expect him to. You could probably go back as far as, probably Texas, maybe Jerez in the calendar in this podcast, and we're probably saying the same things, that he's doing great. We expect Pedro to catch him. It has happened. It's probably, I probably expected maybe a bit more of a resistance from Acosta from Arbolino, just to slow down the kind of the dry rot inside the championship challenge of his lead and stuff. But unfortunately, as soon as Acosta's kind of got to him, it's just falling apart for Arbolino. And I think overall his season still will go down as a positive, but I think I hope it doesn't distract him into next year, where he's still thinking of, I should be in GP now, I should be on that Grassini or whatever. Maybe I think he just needs to probably just go, right, that kind of sag is over now. I'm not going up next year. I need to really dial myself in with this bike for next year. I need to get my head around the Pirelli tires for next year. And we go again, and maybe for 2025 he might see another opportunity. And I do like him, so I hope he can turn around his form. And I do expect him to have decent rounds throughout the season. I don't expect him to be P20 on the grid for the rest of the season. I believe he will come back stronger. But with every race we've mentioned today, a very, very high tyre wear. The track really is just so worn over the years. It's not a very high grip track, and it just wears tyres. You've long corners. You have to be, every rider in every class has been saying all weekend, you have to be patient, have to just respect your rear tyre and your front, especially in the probably bigger classes. It was more of an issue in GP and Moto2 over Moto3. Rhys, very high tyre wear. We expected it coming into this race. How did it really affect the race going forward through the tyre wear?
Well, it meant it had to be played a bit tactically. We've seen it in the past with some Moto2 races. Used to be quite a thing back in the Honda era. I do seem to remember there was definitely races where the tyres used to go off. The tyres probably just maybe weren't as good at that point. That could have been, or the bikes weren't as refined, so they were probably shredding the tyres a bit more. I do remember that Rabat was particularly good in the races where It was quite low conditions with all of his testing at Almeria, but yeah, it was a very tactical race. Obviously, we had some of the faster guys at the front that had the pace all weekend, like Dixon was up there and Canet as well. But then you also had Gonzalez, who he had looked pretty good all weekend, but not a rider you tend to see at the front of races particularly. It was nice to see him there. I think he is definitely a special talent. I've thought that since he got into Moto 2. He's had some decent races, and I think it kind of showed again today. You don't really know the level of the team he's in because, of course, I think it's like the former Petronas team, pretty much.
Yeah, pretty
much.
It's
It's like VR46 and Yamaha's like a academy for. It's actually usually for the Asian market, but I guess he's also being sort of used as a Yamaha Junior. But I don't know exactly how good well, obviously the equipment's a Calex, but you know how good the engineers are and things like that. It's not a team that we ever seen perform very well, but of course it is relatively known. They were rookies last year and got Nazani this year, so may as well not have a teammate. So it's it's interesting to see him up there, but it's one of those races because of the high tyre where it allows the slightly slower riders to make the difference. Not that I'm saying he's slow, but if they're not quite got that ultimate pace on the day, because the others are slowing down and looking after their tyres, it allows those riders to stay with them a bit more, lead the races for a bit more. Kind of showed his inexperience in the way that he obviously took the lead pretty early from Dixon, was leading for a while, but then in the end dropped back quite far. So, I mean, he obviously still had a decent result, but he wasn't in that battle for the win near the end. So it did kind of show, obviously, that was a big part of it, the tyre wear. We also had Acosta had to use his tyre a little bit to get up because he hadn't got a very good start. But again, you could see him sitting there taking stock, looking after his tyre. Canet, to an extent, was doing it as well. The riders are a bit more experienced. I know that Acosta's only in his second season, but he's Acosta and he's with the IO team who are very experienced. So the riders that kind of know what they're doing, the riders have been fast all season. They were looking after the tyres. The slightly slower riders perhaps weren't so much. Albert Arenas, actually, to be fair, was doing quite well, and he seemed to look after his tyre quite well as well. So yeah, it kind of just changes the dynamic of the race because it allows the riders that maybe haven't got the ultimate pace to potentially do it. Because usually the Dunlop tyres, they're so good, you can just push them from the start to the end. So if you're a rider that's a bit slower, doesn't quite have the pace, you dropped after the first couple of laps, that's it, you don't see the leaders again. But in a race like this, where you've got people like Dixon, Acosta, Canet sort of taking the slower route through the, they're not opening the power as early, they're being a bit more gentle on the throttle, they're letting the corner come to them. Until the end, that's when they start doing that a little bit more. They try and make the tyre last. So they're lapping maybe 3, 4, 5 tenths a lap slower than they potentially could. They're still there fastest up to the race, of course, because when the tyre's gone, it's gone. But they're not doing. But they could go a lot quicker for maybe 5 laps, but then obviously ruin their race completely. But then the riders that are a couple of tenths off get a bit of a sniff. They're pushing a bit harder. They get to stay. So it changes the dynamic of the race, and it is interesting because, obviously, I say usually with the Dunlop tyres, you can push them quite hard. So. It was. It did set us up for quite a bit of a tightrope race. You didn't know who quite. You could tell who was trying to look after their tyres, but it's always a bit like who's going to have the best at the end.
Yeah, and I feel like if you go back, it's going to be a bit of a throwback. I think 2017 Argentina, the Aprilia was known for being a pretty average bike, but it didn't use its tyres, and it just brought them into it because they didn't use the tyres. And I think the whole aspect there you explained of the top teams, the top riders manage their tyres, and then the slightly, shall we say, who just don't have maybe the top engineers or they're not a top rider yet, were able to just ride slightly closer to where they're comfortable and just brought the gap down. So we saw riders like you mentioned, closer together where front riders weren't always pulling away and it wasn't a stretch race. So it was an interesting one because, like you said, we haven't had these races where tyres have been a massive issue in Moto2 for quite a while now. It's been pretty standard where a common trait of a Moto2 race is that after the first 6 laps you have kind of a steady 2-second gap to every rider, and unless someone has gotten a really bad setup decision on late of a Saturday or whatever, and they've made it an issue going forward for themselves, there isn't really a big change in your ordering. It's kind of a processional feature race. So unfortunately, we've kind of been maybe underfed what these races are like usually, because we're so used to the tyres being like bowling balls and just they can be pushed to the very last lap. And I remember for me, Alligator set the fastest lap of the race on the last lap at Silverstone, and that's just the sort of tyres that we expect. They just go on forever, and it was an interesting race to watch because we knew Dixon had speed. We'll come to him in a second. We knew Costa was thereabouts, and we knew Canet on home turf was always going to put in a good fight. So it was an interesting battle. I suppose we'll come to probably Canet first. He was quite aggressive, and with the top, we just talked about high tyre, where I didn't really expect him to probably go toe-to-toe with Dixon to the last lap. Did you?
Not quite. I didn't quite expect it. I mean, you could see, like, compared to Gonzalez, for example, he clearly was saving his tyre. Canet's been in Moto2 long enough to know that's the score. That's what you got to do. They've been to Catalunya enough times again to know the score. That's what you got to do. But Canet was clearly using his tyre up a little bit more than the others. But to be fair, he did push right to the end, and he did just about have some in hand. So in fairness, he actually used his tyre quite well. So I won't actually sort of say anything bad about that, because whilst, yes, he was probably using it a bit more, you could see he was a bit more aggressive, and with the throttle and stuff, he still had enough tyre to try and challenge on the last lap. So you can't really say that he used his tyre too much. But I think the thing that let him down was so he was just too aggressive. Like with his, it just seemed a bit desperate to me. Not that any of the moves were particularly bad, right? They didn't hit anybody out the way or anything like that. But he just had a bit of a desperation about him, and I think that maybe just cost him. He got a bit flustered. I think he saw the chance of his first win. We've said this so many times, of course. Could he win this weekend? He had the pace. It's looking good. He was looking good, but ultimately, probably going into that race, I think everybody knew that Jake Dixon had the best pace, right? So it was Dixon you needed to beat, ultimately. And Canet saw his opportunity. Obviously, Acosta came through the pack as well. So those guys were at the front. I think there was a period of time where Canet was leading, and I think he got passed by both of them. And within like 3 corners, he was back in front. But he'd gone around the outside of Dixon, like letting the brake off in the first corner. That was fine. But then what he did into turn 4 was just ridiculous on Acosta. He came from so far back, was just going to run so wide, ran Acosta really wide. Acosta had to pick the bike up. Again, it wasn't like he didn't hit him or anything like that. I'm not saying that the move was really, really bad, but it just showed that he was so desperate. And I think that was his weakness. I think he was a bit too... I think perhaps if he was a bit more calm and he perhaps would have kept the lead and not got overtaken in the first place, I don't think... And it perhaps would have saved a bit more tyre as well and not allowed to be overtaken. I mean, of course, I said that he looked after his tyre quite well because he was still trying even into the last corner, but perhaps if he had a little bit more, he'd been able to make the pass. So, yeah, I think that was what let him down. His pace was pretty good. To be fair, Dixon still had the best pace overall, so it was pretty difficult, obviously, to try and surpass him, but I think he just was too desperate today, and I don't think he necessarily... Again, I've said today, I'm just going to roll with it. He seemed a bit desperate to me. That's my main takeaway from Canet. He was very aggressive with some of his passes. The other riders seemed to think so as well. And maybe if he'd composed himself a bit better, he would have perhaps put a quicker race together and ended up potentially winning. But obviously, you never really know.
Like, his move into the final corner, the rear end comes around and it's an off throttle, like, rear slide. So it does show that is the absolute sign that I have no grip left. When it's off throttle kind of coming around you, that is the universal, oh no, rubber gone, we are in trouble. I know it's the last corner, and there was a rider a couple of years ago who was... I remember it was always Pedrosa towards the end of his Honda years. He was actually getting to the race with a bit too much time. They were kind of like, right, halfway through the race, we need you to pick it up. And I feel with Canet, he's probably done the almost perfect job of getting to the last lap with enough tyre. But again, he just clearly didn't have the tyre to make the overtake. And again, you go back to the letting the breaker off around Dixon. Dixon was pretty strong into turn 1. He was passing a lot of people there, and I think just the fact that he had the speed, he was in Spain, the race when it was there, it was one of those races where it was definitely not about outright speed. It was about a high speed chess match, really, about managing the tyre. And I think we'll come to Dixon here in a second after Acosta, but Dixon did a phenomenal job of not being dragged into these. It's so easy when a rider passes you just want to get on the back wheel and you just want to, he's opened the throttle here, I'm going to do it here and just steer with the rear, and I'm going to stick on his rear wheel and I'm going to show my wheel then into 5 or whatever. And Dixon didn't fall for it. And at the end of the day, Canet got dragged into them a bit more, and that might have been the 1 or 2% that cost him that chance into last corner, or maybe he could have been closer in somewhere else on the last lap. Maybe he could have got a move into 5 or into 10 on the last lap, or maybe just done something different and caught Jake by surprise. But I think the slight scruffiness and probably mental weakness that Canet has, that he hasn't won the race, and I think every race week, I think when he has the speed, it definitely plays on his mind that I could win this. And I think that's probably something we've maybe have seen from Dixon maybe last year, when he had speed and he was in the front and he kind of got a decent start, and then he tip off in probably a silly circumstance. Whereas I think Canet's kind of at that point, except he's a lot more experienced and probably shouldn't be making these mistakes. But it's he's clearly done enough to earn him another seat, as he's re-signed with the Vietti's team, Fantic. That's it. He's resigned for them for next year. Obviously, his team is pulling out, so he still has another opportunity next year. But I think every podcast goes by that we kind of say he could have, maybe should have. My kind of overall opinions of him go down a touch to the fact he still is making these mistakes. Now, again, it wasn't an egregious mistake from him on Sunday. It was a couple of minor ones, but the top riders don't make them ones. So it's going to be tough for him to make the GP because of what everything is going on. But the way he just keeps kind of falling on his face when his chances are there. So it's unfortunate for him, but I still think probably eventually he will win one. It's kind of he's still too quick. Like, he's so good over one lap. It's just the 25 laps on a Sunday kills him. It's just, there's always
you can only be second so many times
until
the rider first crashes. Like, you know,
exactly.
What I mean?
So eventually P1 will come probably. But anyway, moving on to Acosta, who was slightly off colour on Sunday. Would you say probably not his strongest weekend? Is there a small chink in his armour? Maybe he just uses a bit too much tyre. Is that kind of what he relies on? Maybe.
Actually, I think you're right in terms of it wasn't his weekend. He kind of admitted to Neil Hodgson on the track guide they did off camera that he doesn't really like Catalunya very much. But his pace wasn't that bad. Even over one lap wasn't that bad. But his damage was almost done in qualifying to an extent, because he invalidated his lap many times. He kept going on the green on quite a few different occasions, and he ended up ninth place when, to be honest, he could have started in the front row. Yeah, he had the pace of the front row. Perhaps, maybe not pole. I think Dixon had a bit of an edge over everybody. Including Acosta, because we saw in the qualifying how he sort of rolled up to the back of him and passed him, so he clearly had a bit on everyone. But I think Acosta could very well have ended up on that front row, and maybe we're talking about a bit of a different race. But to be honest, I don't think he did a lot wrong. He was kind of just the victim of other people's desperation. Obviously, I mentioned it before with the Canet move into turn 4. Canet came from very far back on a very narrow line, and it was a block pass, so Acosta had to pick the bike up and run wide. So he lost that position. Dixon then also snuck through. Coming up quickly behind them was Arenas, and into turn 6 or 7, Arenas also then sent it on Acosta, running him wide, which lost him the run up the hill towards turn 9, which allowed Gonzalez to get through. So he dropped from first to about, 5th, 6th, really just by being dive bombed by people, which you can't really do a lot about. And then that left him behind Gonzalez. Obviously, again, he didn't want to use too much tyre. Perhaps maybe you're right. Perhaps he had used a little bit too much, so he struggled to get back past Gonzalez. But then Lopez then rammed him out of the way at the first corner, which is probably worth noting. It's another bit of a, I think it was mentioned on the commentary, it's kind of a bit of a theme with Lopez. Sometimes he just does things that are a bit brainless. He's such a fast rider. He's so good. On his weekends, he's fantastic. But he does these moves sometimes that are just a bit silly. I mean, I remember Valencia last year. I think he sort of rode the side of Acosta at one point, being not really aggressive with him. Obviously, Mugello took out Sam Lowe's, and then he messed up the long lap trying to take it too quickly. Did he take somebody out of Portimao as well? I can't really remember. Pretty sure he fell off, but I can't remember if he took anybody with him, actually, to be fair. But I feel there's another incident or two that I'm missing there. There's definitely been a couple, but it seems to be a bit of a trend. Sometimes he does very silly, needless moves. I don't really know what he was doing, but obviously him and Acosta both went wide, and then that was it then at that point for Acosta. He was detached from the group only I think there was only a few laps to go. That was his race over. So I'll actually stand by him and say he didn't really do much wrong. He was leading the race, got dive bombed by a few people, and then that was his race kind of screwed. So yeah, the damage maybe was done on Saturday, because if he started P3, perhaps he doesn't have to use so much tyre in the opening laps to get his way through, and perhaps maybe he's quicker and doesn't get sort of caught off guard and dive bombed by those guys. Perhaps he's a bit further up the road, although I suppose he was leading when he got dive bombed the first time, so obviously that does play a part in it. But then maybe if he had that tyre left, maybe he could recover from those incidents. But yeah, I think he got a bit bullied around, and maybe you could say that's a weakness as well. But I mean, if you've got the option to either crash or pick the bike up, you're going to pick the bike up, especially when you're leading the championship. And maybe that's what the other guys are thinking too. So yeah, it's still a good weekend for him, because he still gained a lot of points on his nearest rival. Now, in fairness, perhaps maybe he needs to start looking away from Arbolino, because I don't know what the points are exactly, but Dixon must be pretty close to passing Arbolino at this point. So he probably lost a few points there, but again, he's got a pretty healthy lead. Dixon's not particularly a championship rival to him, so yeah, even though on paper it's not the best result, still finished like in the top 10, was it like 6th, 7th place and all that, so not that bad when it's a track you don't like as well, beating championship rival.
So currently Acosta to Arbolino is 22 points in Acosta's favour, and it is 44 points in Acosta's favour over Dixon, so almost 2 race wins.
Oh yeah, it's like literally it's actually a bigger gap than I thought.
It's quite a bit, considering that a couple of the English, or British should I say, motorcycle outlets are banging the drum that it's Dixon versus Acosta again for the championship win. Well, I think it will be Dixon second by the end of the season. I agree,
I'd be surprised if it wasn't. But yeah, he's not in the championship fight per se.
It's yeah, exactly. Like, being second doesn't mean you're in.
Like Dovi wasn't in the 2019 championship.
Exactly.
But yeah.
Someone has to be second. It doesn't mean you're there because you're giving P1 a run for its money. Just a small bit on Alonso. He also didn't rejoin the track correctly, which was called up by Neil Hodgson at the time in the Moto2 race.
True. Yeah,
it's just another bit of.
Did he rejoin really aggressively in front of Aldeguer?
Yeah, he just cut straight back across the track.
Yeah.
So if you are, just to explain turn 1, there is basically a small little track that you have to go through the cones and through the barriers and back out onto the track. It basically brings you onto the outside. You got to do the long lap.
You have to do the end of the long lap.
Exactly, that's it. So you are doing the long lap and brings you out onto the kind of exit of turn 2, kind of the outside part of 3. Basically, it's a nice safe rejoin, doesn't bring you back into any danger. Many people who have done the long lap throughout the weekend, a lot of people at the end of sessions go through just to get a bit of rubber down, just to clean up. You never know when you can jump a start, you can take a rider out, it happens. So a lot of riders are conscious that at the end of Friday, I might as well do on my in lap, probably just do the long lap. So again, for whatever reason, he just decides to turn completely right and drive right back onto the track at a parallel angle to the riders coming against him. So it was just weird. The overtake attempt was silly. Ran Acosta off, ran himself off, and then decides to cut back and then try and get ahead of him. So he needs to. The team needs to have a word with him, because a lot of the things we talked about, he does get penalties for, but he's not in a championship hunt. He's in races to win them. That's kind of his goal. So if he gets a penalty, that's the race over for him anyway. So there's no kind of long-term penalty for him. So I think the team need to have a chat with him first, just to kind of settle him down. And again, there's no question of his talent, but he can get very hot under the collar and just kind of do clueless things on track, which are probably, if you look at him, he's probably in line to get one of the better seats in Moto2 in the next year or two. And if I'm Akio, for example, and I'm looking at that and he's doing these silly things, I'm probably picking someone. I'd be picking for me and Aldeguer over him, put it that way. When they're very close in speed, it's these silly mistakes that he's doing, and these just weird decisions he makes on track is what would kind of sway me to pick another rider. But back to, I suppose, Acosta. Make a very good point that his race weekend was definitely affected by Saturday. in Moto 2 in general, if you have to come through the pack, you have to use tyre, you have to put extra heat and load through them. You always have to use tyre. And again, we go back to him being dive bomb. It was one of those weekends where the pace wasn't sensationally hot. You have Albert Arenas coming through thinking, oh, I can get at him now, I can just leave the brake off, and I'm through. And it's these mental switches of, okay, it's not a outright pace, I can't do 1 minute whatever's around this place and be 3/10 off him at this track, when it's so much of a slower, long kind of thinking man's race, you could call it. People can get a little trigger happy and jump onto the back of people and go for these moves. It's kind of what Canet did when he had his opportunities at the front. Arenas did it, Lopez tried it, and Gonzalez also had his few attempts. So it's just, for Acosta, I think he got caught up in other people's kind of getting a bit giddy on a track that probably was very low grip. It was a different style of race. The whole weekend was slightly different because of these. I know tyres in the GP class do go off and you have to manage somewhat, but Catalunya has always been a massive exception. You always go there knowing that it's going to be one of those slow pace. Manage your tyre.
Yeah, like 4 seconds a lap off by the end. You don't get that anywhere else.
Exactly. It's like, I compare it to the Formula 1 where you go, look what they qualified, look what they race. It's that much of a gap. And in fairness to GP, in 19 out of the other 20 rounds of the season or whatever, we are within, our race pace is usually within a second of our outright fast lap. We're pretty good at being close to the limit and racing at that as well. So it's usually, it's quite nice. I think, I don't like a couple of years ago in F1 where they were like 7 seconds a lap quicker in qualifying than what the race pace. It doesn't really interest me having that big gap. I like the way we're close. Now, in terms of this weekend, it was just down to the fact that the degradation was so high. Obviously, the equipment doesn't really change that much in terms of outright pace versus race pace, but the fact they used so much tyre, it just kind of threw Acosta probably into a unfortunate loop. And again, very, very good point that people probably throw a wheel up the inside knowing he is the man for the championship. He can't afford to lean on you like you could say Marini did in Austria. He can't afford to try that in case it backfires. The 25 points thrown out the window or a big fat zero is huge to him, whereas for Alonso Lopez, it's another race weekend for you if you crash, to be honest. So we're going to move now to Dixon. Rhys, probably his best weekend in Moto 2, would you say?
Yeah, probably. I mean, to be fair, Assen was pretty good as well. Obviously, the previous one that he won, but this, I think you're right. I think it is his best because he had the pace from FP1. He was on the pace. And we've seen this last year, right? A few times. He was rapid from FP1, was really quick the whole weekend. Perhaps sometimes he fumbled it, but a couple of times he ended up on pole position, but he didn't win the race. And you made a good comparison earlier, talking about Canet looking desperate, making these mistakes in this race with something that Dixon would have done last year. And yeah, he probably would have done. If the roles are reversed and this is last year, Dixon probably uses his tyre, probably is over-aggressive, probably doesn't end up winning the race. But now that he's got that win under his belt, he understands how to win a race, probably believes in himself, knows he's got the pace. He just played it to perfection, to be quite honest. He knew he had the best pace. When Gonzalez went past him, he didn't panic. When Canet went past him, he didn't panic. When Acosta went past him, he didn't panic. He just stuck on the back of them, kept doing his same pace. All right, he re-overtook them when the opportunity came. Like when Gonzalez started to drop back through, his pace started to drop off. Quickly dispatched of him. Obviously, he saw Acosta go through on Canet, probably decided that he'd also do the same. So Canet then got back past both of them. Then that made it sort of a fight for the win between the two of them. But yeah, he basically just kept doing his pace, rolled back up to the back of Canet, overtook him. Never really looked like he was overstressing the tyre. I couldn't even point out a single mistake that he made. Actually, he did go hot a couple of times into turn one, but sometimes
I feel like that was in his defence. Exactly, he was kind of going, squaring off or stopping the dive, I think would be the way of saying it.
Yeah. Probably because, I mean, like he said after the race, he thought Canet was being really aggressive, dive bombing and stuff, and Canet's trying to roll around the outside of you. Like, you probably don't want that. You don't want to get put offline and then having to pick up the bike and spin up the tyre to actually get out the corner. So, yeah, I think, maybe you're right then. Perhaps he wasn't maybe a mistake. So, yeah, it just really was a fantastic race. It's the kind of race that you would expect to see from, I know, like, I'm not saying he is a championship contender, but it's the kind of race you see from the championship contenders. So, yeah, it's just a great weekend for him. Good to see him bounce back as well because he had a poor race in Silverstone, but he had a pretty good race in Red Bull Ring. But back on the podium for him, I think is good, and it's obviously good to see different riders winning as well. So we have well, I suppose we had a couple of different riders winning the last few races actually. So yeah, it's nice to see another rider win. And of course, he won back in Aston, but still, just a really good weekend for him. I can't really fault him. I mean, say what you want. Other times, definitely, there's been places to sort of say, "Oh, he's done this wrong, he's done that wrong." But I think this weekend he didn't really put a foot wrong. He was quickest in most of the practice sessions, topped qualifying, won the race, and didn't overstress his tyre.
Yeah, it was a very mature race from him. He's known for being good in his tires. To be honest, race when he got to start and didn't go backwards and led maybe the first 6 laps, I think, before was it Gonzalez took the lead off him.
Actually, a good point there. The start was good because the starts aren't usually that good. So yeah,
his starts usually is what catch him. He usually goes 2.6 behind Acosta, and then the commentators like, well, he's matched him for the last 8 laps, and then he finishes 3 seconds behind. So he does, and he likes banging on himself about how he can match Acosta. So it's clear that maybe if he can keep getting these, his qualifying is weak usually, but in fairness, pole position this weekend was probably undoubtedly really the fastest man outright all weekend. And as soon as he got pole, you think, right, if he really gets a bad start, he's probably 5th. He's probably still there. And one of these slower races where the gap isn't going to grow, he could probably still do something. But the fact he got a good launch, made sure he kept the lead, and again, 4, 5, 6 laps he led before he was passed by someone who was a bit more hungry to take the lead and push the pace on, who backfired for them, obviously. And Jake then went back to P3, and to be honest, it was like he was doing a time trial. He's like, every other bike on the track didn't matter to him. He got overtaken, just kept doing the same lap, didn't look out of shape. He didn't do the typical, I've been passed, let me try and stick on him, make his mistake, let me force his pace on, push him on into something that he's uncomfortable with. He just kind of was like, yeah, I'm doing this lap time, I'm doing it whether you're ahead of me, behind me, overtaking or what. I have a strategy he's stuck to, and I think he's one of the kind of probably mature riders in the class now, I suppose, and he just had a perfect race weekend. And I think if he doesn't move up to GP, which that looks like that ship may be a sale from him, obviously he has re-signed with the Gas team for next year, he'll definitely be a man for the championship next year, whether this year goes his way or not. With terms of, you'd imagine when we get to other rounds, Acosta will probably blitz him in a couple of rounds a season, and he'll probably win by 4 or 5 seconds. His outright speed and talent will probably show more. But I think Jake he's had a really solid season, 2 wins. He's into double digits now in terms of podium and outright career in Moto 2. So he's having a very solid season, so you have to tip your hat to him, in fairness. He's really looking impressive. He definitely looks like he deserves to be at the front of the Moto 2 class. Now, moving on to the Premier class, it was all weekend. Again, I keep mentioning it, the tyres, everyone was giving out about the tracks after getting so much worse. They're on about they want it resurfaced. Everyone was complaining that they had no drive grip in any condition, and also something that you don't usually see was they were killing front tyres. Maverick Vinales' picture of him after the sprint race, 12 laps was a sprint race, and he said he had no front tyre left. Then there was a picture of him about 16 laps into the full race, and his front tyre was destroyed. So clearly they weren't kind of moaning over nothing. The tyres were ridiculous. Now we're going to start with the sprint. Aleix Espargaro, recovery from last year, puts all his demons to bed, even had the special head helmet on, kind of probably joking, gesturing himself after his mistake last year. He was pretty special in the sprint, really, to overtake Pecco and do what he did, wasn't he, Rhys?
Yeah, it was something really, really special. I mean, the Aprilia was working fantastically all weekend. They both got a good start off the line as well, which obviously is quite a big thing because Catalunya is probably the longest run to turn 1 from the line, I would say.
Maybe Qatar, but it would be close.
Yeah, maybe Qatar. Magello is probably up there as well, but it's one of the longer runs. You don't want to be getting a bad start. You don't want to be really Yamaha, I guess, as well.
Exactly.
Would be what you'd be saying. So, yeah, it started with that. They both got good starts. Obviously, that is to do with the rider, but it does seem like the bike has made a step, so that's good. But he was turning so well all weekend. I mean, both of the factory Aprilias were rapid all weekend, but Aleix seemed to have that little bit extra. And yeah, he managed to pass Pecco in a very, very good way into turn 1, sort of left him he didn't run him out of the road, but he didn't allow him sort of be able to hang it around the outside or to be able to level him, which is really difficult to do on Bagnaia because he's so late on the brakes. But Aleix, he managed to level him, and to be fair, when you're on the outside and someone's leveled you, there's not much you can do about it. You've got to just kind of accept it. And that's what Bagnaia did, because again, I guess he's fighting for the championship as well. There is that element of that obviously Aleix is not fighting for the championship, so you could risk it a little bit more. It's home race as well. And he just rode a perfect race from there. Just the pace was amazing. The pass that he did was amazing. Obviously, he got past Viñales as well as teammates very early on in the race. I think he did him on like lap 1, even though actually Viñales got a slightly better start because I think he'd had he got out qualified Viñales? Which I can't remember, but Viñales was ahead briefly. He then overtook, put himself into the lead position, made the pass that Maverick himself couldn't make on Bagnaia, and just brought it on home. And it was great to see him on top at his home race, like you say, with the helmet on as well. The one more lap and see all his family on the top of it. Lovely to see. It was and I actually, not to do with Aleix, but I actually quite enjoyed what they did with the sprint, how they had it at the Monster Energy place. I think that was quite cool. How they had the sort of little podium there. But yeah, he couldn't have asked for much of a better sprint, to be fair.
Yeah, again, it was very clear as well. We mentioned the Aprilia starts. Miguel Oliveira was P5, and he did suffer on all 3 race starts. I noticed a lot that he didn't get the launch. So clearly the factory boys have some sort of tricked out system that's improved for them. And basically that was probably the turning point for the race weekend, because nearly every race weekend they turn up, they're quick, they can do one lap pretty good. It's just the starts they've been poor, and we know the Aprilia is the most Yamaha-esque V4. It's probably not the most easy to overtake on. So for them to be in P2, P3, P4 from lap 1 is a big help for them, and it really changes their outlook on the race. And like we said, Aleix, I think by the time he got to turn 5, he'd put about half a second into Pecco. He was just rapid. It was unusual to see a rider have that much speed. He was just outrageously quick. Of course, Pecco took pole, but I think Pecco is just in such a rich vein of form. He's really in a purple patch, and I think that bike, everything that's going for him, I think over one lap there probably isn't anyone better in the world at the moment. Maybe Marquez in terms of talent, but I don't think Marquez can touch that speed just with the equipment. So I think Pecco is probably the best man at the moment. It was Martin for a while. He's kind of had a bit of I don't want to say a wobbler, but he's just taken a small step back. He's not as Martin as he used to be, where every Q2 session you go, well, Jorge Martin has a chance here for pole. I think he's just been a bit more, I think, to be honest, right, his qualifying is suffering, but his races are improving, which is probably at the end of the day what you probably would take as a MotoGP rider. But just to finish up with Aleix, yeah, maybe that's it. Like it's exactly it. Like we kind of go back to the Valentino years, I suppose, and some other like a Davi could never qualify but could do well on a Sunday, and I think that's just what some people maybe Martin kind of being a little bit more inexperienced when he came into class was all about, I can go quicker here, but it was over one lap and can't do it over a race distance. I think that's probably why we're seeing him. He ran Pecco close in Sachsenring, and he's had a decent, we will cover him in a minute, but he's had another decent weekend again. But just overall, all 3, I think Raul Fernandez was having a decent weekend, but did have a couple of mechanicals. So I think the Aprilia just was the bike to be on around here in every facet of abilities. Just that track was perfect for them. And again, you go back to last year, if you take Fabio out of it, Aleix on paper wins that race if he does all the laps. So it was a real special one, and I was so happy when he won it, because I just feel like people get remembered for mistakes. Some riders go down history for, he was the guy that did that, and I didn't want Aleix's to be remembered for the guy who rolled off at his home race a lap early and lost the podium, because that really hurt him, and you could see it really hurt him. And I think to bounce back this weekend, wins the sprint. We'll come to the main race in a minute, but it was just a perfect race weekend. I think it just puts last year to bed, and he'll probably remember as the guy who outright lap record now with his home race, dominated the sprint, dominated the full race. But he was special, and it was just really good. But we'll move to Bagnaia. Sprint race, solid points. Again, makes a step on his rivals. It's just your typical Bagnaia where he kind of gets the most that's available. I don't think there's anyone touching Aleix on Saturday. He did impressive work to get the pole position. Again, it's just Bagnaia being the kind of steamroller he is, really.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, like you say, he is just that next level in qualifying every single weekend now for like the last couple of seasons, really. He's just had that extra little bit at the end of Sunday. Of course, like you say, Martin previously kind of had that, but he does seem to have potentially lost that a little bit, and he's not quite as fast as he was previously over one lap, which is a shame. Obviously, it would allow it to be a lot closer, but yeah, Bagnaia just been amazing. We were gushing about how good he was at the Austrian Grand Prix. He didn't have that level of advantage over the rivals this weekend because, like you said, the Aprilia probably was the better bike to be on this weekend. But put it on pole position. All right, Aleix beat him. Where was Bezzecchi? Nowhere, but we'll come on to that later. Well, actually, Martin is the closest rival anyway, but Martin was perfectly a fair few places behind him. But Bagnaia, probably the best thing he did was managing to beat Vinales, to be fair. Just saved a few more points. Obviously didn't try a silly move around the outside of Aleix or anything like that. Didn't try and stick it around the outside. He just sort of kept up the position when he'd been levelled and sort of ran wide. So, yeah, you can't really criticise the guy. For once, you could probably say he didn't have the best bike. And, he still did a really good job with what he did have. I mean, don't get me wrong, the Ducati was still a very quick bike this weekend, and with the right setup, I'm sure it could probably pull out a quicker lap time than the Aprilia. But the Aprilia just seems to be the better bike out the box for the circuit. And he took second place in the sprint. Couldn't ask for much more. Pole position as well. Yeah, right, wasn't as dominant as previously, but it didn't really matter. He got beat by Aleix because Aleix is nowhere in the championship.
Yeah, again, I think Aleix's season started so poorly, crashing in Argentina, and he just I think, going so close last year, Aleix probably had a small bit of a hangover coming into the season, thinking that he could try to go again, and this preseason test went so well. The bike is sleeker, it's better on the braking, we've more power, change the direction, and so much more corner speed. Everything was going amazing that you're kind of thinking, is he kind of trying to sell his stall too much to the fact that he's probably not going to be there? And to be fair, both Aprilias, at the start of the season, Miguel Oliveira was by far the most convincing and quick Aprilia. Obviously, his season has been just shot out of a cannon and off a cliff. It's gone so badly for him. But the other two, the factory boys, just seem to just get lost. And I think probably coming up to the European rounds, and we had the break, and since they came back, they've been brilliant. So it's good to see, because Aprilia's had such a tough time in the Premier class, and now we're getting to see their fruits of their labour, and they're really, really a good team. And it's nice to see them back where they should be, top manufacturer in the 1 to 5s or 250 days, all them nearly decades ago at this point. It's just good to see having them back. But we're going to move now to the main race, and we're going to have to start with the original race start, the Turn 1 incident, Turn 1 and 2, technically 3 if you want to be pedantic. What did you make of the kind of... We'll start, I suppose, with the crash in Turn 1, Bastianini Skittles. What did you make of it? I think it's a pretty clear incident, but I'd like to get your thoughts anyway.
It's one of those incidents that we seem to get it at Catalunya so often. Obviously, we had a similar kind of thing last season with Nakagami, although I will say Nakagami's was way more egregious. He broke so much later than everybody else. And obviously skittled out the pack. Bagnaia was on the riders then, and that's when everyone was like, oh, his championship's really over now, which obviously turned out to not be. But that's happened there. We had 2006, which if you haven't seen that race, which probably a lot of you haven't, because obviously it was quite a long time ago, there was a big pile up there as well. Sete Gibernau on the Ducati at the time, so alongside his teammate Caparossi, braked quite hard trying to overtake him, but he was on the white line of the pit lane exit and just sent him over the handlebars, and they just skittled out like quite a lot of the riders. A big red flag, just nasty accidents, kind of similar kind of thing, I guess, that happened at this Turn 1, but it's probably a bit worse, to be honest. But the actual crash that we got, Bastianini, he broke quite late, obviously trying to be aggressive, again, not having the pace. Obviously, it is one of those things like we mentioned, of course, the front tyre. The front tyre is always a problem, but at this track in particular, with the tyre being so bad, the front tyre was actually probably worse than the rear. I mean, the rear was also a big problem, but the front tyre was overheating so much and wearing out so much. You had to try to make the passes on lap 1. That is the MotoGP that we have now. You've got to make your passes on lap 1, or you don't make them at all. So everybody's a bit more aggressive as well, which makes these first corner incidents happen even more. But yeah, he broke quite late. Not egregiously late, but he did break pretty late. He was risking a lot, and he went to the inside, and he just ran out of room. It's completely his fault, of course. He's going for an aggressive pass. runs out of room. But it wasn't as bad as what Nakagami did last year, I didn't think, because, if it just happened slightly differently, like he's probably still making the corner, but it's just because he didn't have enough space. He just went into the side of a rider before he could. But if he didn't if there was nobody there and he's on that trajectory and brakes like he does, I think he stays on the track. But yeah, it was he bit off too much, he hit Zarco first, I believe, and then they skittled out Digi Antonio, Alex Marquez, and Marco Bezzecchi as well. Obviously, Bastianini, he's got a fractured. Has he got a fracture in like his ankle and his hand?
Yeah, he's had surgery today on both.
Yeah, so he's had surgery on both of those. Zarco, from what I could tell, got away unscathed. I think both the Grassini guys did too. Did you say Bezzecchi has picked up an injury as well from that incident potentially?
It's kind of similar to Le Mans with Luca Marini, where it's kind of just hyperextended from what I can tell. What I've read is there's no broken bones, just a bit of contusion, which is MotoGP's fancy way of saying heavy bruising. So probably just a bit battered and bruised. His right leg and his left kind of thumb area was from what I've read is his kind of issues at the moment. But will be fit from Zana, just we don't know how fit.
Okay, cool. Right, cool. On board with that then, because I hadn't seen all the news that happened with that, but good job you've seen it. But yeah, so he skittled out a load of Ducatis, which is great when you're trying to make sure that you keep your factory Ducati ride as well. But yeah, it was just a bit of a silly error. Again, not absolutely egregious. Like I don't even think it's as bad as Martin at the previous round. It's just unfortunate the way it goes with that first corner. Like he's broke pretty late. Like, to be fair, like it is a send. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's quite as much of a send. He's just sort of ran out of room and just gone into them skilled a few. He's picked up the biggest injury himself. He has also got a long lap when he comes back, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, he's kind of come off worse with that one. Everybody else got to restart the race, so kind of one of those instances where he kind of penalised himself as well.
Yeah, I feel like now I might be wrong in saying this, but just from a viewer's on look, I suppose, I feel like it's one of those things where he's braked on the inside of the track. It's a bit dirtier. There's probably, I'd say the aero might have had a small effect on it. It's just these little particle effects of it have happened where it's lap one, the front tyre pressures are probably different to Ronnie's run all weekend because he knows he's going to be in the pack, and he just brakes a touch deep, like a split second, and you're maybe 2-3 meters deeper than you need to be, and that's all it takes. Like every one of these riders on the limit, every corner of every lap of every race. So it's just it's what happens, and again it's downhill into turn one, you're kind of being pushed in. The wind was ridiculously high. We saw Iko Lacona crash on his sighting lap, and he said 100% it was the wind got under the front. So it was just a small mistake. Unfortunately, we've seen that Catalunya before into turn one. A small mistake usually means bowling. Again, thankfully it was only him that kind of sustained injuries. Zarco did kind of get thrown, but seems to bounce quite well, so thankfully he's okay. Again, some small injuries to Bezzecchi, but nothing too bad, no breaks, and that wasn't too bad. So again, it was horrible to see, but obviously as we'll come to in a second, it got a lot worse. So we thought anyway in the next corner, Rhys. We're lucky really on Sunday, weren't we, of what we saw, to be honest.
Yeah, we're very, very lucky with the incident that happened. So obviously everyone saw that crash and we're like, oh, that's big. And it cuts back and you see Bagnaia high side and you're like, oh, what's happened there? And all of a sudden Brad Binder's, he's sort of spinning in the middle of the pack. Brad Binder was the only rider that collected him, fortunately, because obviously that's one of those things where you can easily get hit. And obviously to start with, obviously we saw immediately that obviously gone over Bagnaia's legs, so that's obviously you never want to see a rider get hit. Of course, if you see them get hit, that's the place you want to see it, probably, rather than like head or back or something like that. But so immediately straight away we knew it wasn't going to be a critical thing. But fortunately, it seems like we've escaped what could be a nasty little incident, because obviously getting your legs run over, we've seen Alex Rins, for example, he's been out since Mugello with a broken leg, with the bad break he had. If you get run over by a MotoGP bike on both your legs, that breaks both legs. That could be a career ender, one of those things. I mean, it could be something that affects you in your life as well after motorcycle racing. But fortunately, it seems like Bagnaia has basically got away with no injuries whatsoever. perhaps a bit of bruising, but yeah, very, very fortunate. Obviously, high-sided out of turn 2. Obviously, then bit blindsided. Brad said he didn't see him until a bit later because obviously he was obstructed by other riders. Ran over him. He seemed to take some damage to the bike as well. Like, I don't know if it's a radiator or something, but the fluid all went onto the tyres. So then Brad high-sided himself off after going over Bagnaia. So fortunately, Brad was also okay in that one. But yeah, nasty accident. Obviously, one of those things where we didn't know exactly what was going on. We didn't know how injured Bagnaia was. Obviously, they were showing lots of the replays, which is never nice, especially when they're literally showing the guy get ran over. Fair enough, show his crash from before because we didn't know what happened with that, but we don't want to see the guy get run over like 20 times whilst the red flag's out. I mean, sure, we knew obviously his condition wasn't that severe, but even still, you don't want to be seeing that kind of thing. And we didn't know what state his legs were in. We didn't know that obviously he was going to be absolutely fine, as it seems. But yeah, it was we got very lucky today because, you know, if he span round the other way, that's a completely different incident. And even if the same incident happens, could very easily have picked up quite a nasty leg break, which, again, like I said, that could be a career ender, and that's not something you want to see.
From what I've read from Pecco's kind of statements and little snippets he's had since he's been out of the medical centre, he's actually came off worse from the high side. Kind of the impact from the high side is done a bit of damage. Now, again, it's heavy bruising and kind of soreness, but the fact that he escaped a double leg break or a massive compound fracture to his legs, I still don't understand how it could happen.
I don't understand how Bastianini's come off worse, but
yeah, exactly. It was a horrible incident, and again, I agree. I don't want to be seeing it live, seeing his legs being run over, because that could have been, and a lot of people thought it. We mightn't have said at the time that easily could have been the end of his career, which would have been terrible because he's coming into his peak now. He's in his mid-20s now. He's on the Factory Ducati. It's probably the best bike, and everything's kind of going well for him, and he's winning races, and he's on for a second championship. As of right now, he should be back for Misano, we're thinking, which is this weekend. So he's escaped, not even escaped lucky, it's a miracle he's not broken something. He went for either a CAT scan or a PET scan, I can't remember which is which, in the circuit, the in-house circuit doctors. Basically, they saw a little kind of a chip or crack on a bone, but they believed it was potentially from an old injury, which it turned out to be from. So again, it's just somehow he managed to escape that without a massive career or season-ending injury is crazy. And again, if you have seen him spinning around after the high side, it could have been so easy. He could have been 180 degrees upside down, and that could have been it could have been another Simoncelli we could have seen. It could have been so worse. It doesn't even bear thinking about how bad that could have been. But thankfully, he's okay, a little battered and bruised, but was walking out of the hospital Sunday evening. Or he was just, it's still even days on that I just cannot get my head around how he get collected by another bike and get away pretty much scot-free. And again, it's good to see Binder as well, coming off uninjured. So moving on now to the restart, we waited about 20-25 minutes from Pecco getting into the back of the ambulance and taken to the medical centre, and we had a restart, full restart, and thankfully again everyone bar Pecco made the grid. There was someone else as well. Was it Bastianini who didn't make it back out?
Bastianini didn't make it back out.
Yeah,
so there was no Factory Ducati.
So no Factory Ducatis. And again, Aprilia, another good launch from them. They were pretty much unstoppable this weekend, and we got our first Aleix versus Vinales. Well, we've had a few of them, but usually it's for like P7. They've battled a few times this season when they were slightly under the weather in terms of Argentina. They were battling when Aleix crashed. They were battling for like top fives in, I want to say, Jerez around then, I think, as well. Back when Pecco and the KTMs were battling, I think the two of them were battling for a few fissions back. What did you make of Vinales? We've kind of already touched that. Aleix has been brilliant. Vinales surprised you this weekend, or is it something that you've come to expect from Maverick?
Cool. It's me, the resident Maverick Vinales fan of the podcast. I was willing him on when I saw how well they were doing. The start he got when he was leaving the race, I was like, this could be it. This could finally be Vinales. But yeah, I was. Well, we saw the day before that Aleix was doing a lot better with the tyre. Vinales was struggling a lot more. But Aleix had a white wheel rim on. which obviously deflected the heat. Quite a lot of the teams were doing that. Jake Dixon had that in Moto 2 as well, so it was a thing that was happening throughout the classes, and it obviously does make a difference because, as we know, obviously black absorbs a lot more infrared radiation or ultraviolet different radiations and stuff, which obviously then causes the tyre to heat up because that's what the tyre's actually attached to the rim. So that is going to obviously cause excess wear. And over a 40-minute race, I would say that's obviously not an insignificant amount. And after the sprint race, Vinales said, "Oh yeah, I'll have to try the same rim that Aleix was using in the main race," but then he didn't for some reason, which was strange. I don't know whether they didn't have another one or what the decision behind that was. Maybe he didn't want to mess with the setup. It is Vinales after all. We know he can be quite finicky when it comes to these things. But yeah, initially he had the lead. Obviously the gap he pulled it out a little bit. Aleix brought it back a bit. Then I believe Aleix must have made a mistake because then Vinales had about 1.5 seconds, something like that. And it's looking like he's got this under control now. This could be it. But Aleix just starts whittling it away, catching him up, sits there for a couple of laps. We see out of turn 9 on a couple of occasions, he gets a much better exit. We saw out the last corner as well. And in the end, he makes that pass, basically the exact same pass that he put on Pecco Bagnaia in the main race. No, sorry, the sprint race. But this time, Vinales tries to hold it around the outside, but has to pick up the bike and go off through the long lap penalty and stuff. So that cost him, obviously, a little bit of time. And from then, obviously, Aleix had the pace up until that point. Vinales had the pace in the early part of the race, but I think once his tyre had gone off, Aleix just had so much more. So Aleix pulled away. But then actually on the last couple of laps, Vinales closed right back up to him. And if there was another lap, it would have been a bit of a scrap because I think Vinales was only a 10th behind him over the line. It was a very good last lap for Maverick Vinales, which, you know, Mr. King of the late race, I guess you would say. But yeah, it's kind of what we have seen, though, over these two as teammates in Aprilia, because everyone, when Vinales first joined Aprilia, was kind of like, yeah, once he gets used to the bike, he'll start beating Aleix pretty easily, because that's what happened when they were teammates at Suzuki. He pretty much dominated Aleix in that team. But on the Aprilia, it hasn't been like that. Aleix has been, when it's been these battles between them, most of the time Aleix comes out on top, or when the Aprilia is working the best, Aleix is the one that gets the best out of it. I think Vinales perhaps does better sometimes on the weekends where the Aprilia is not working as well. He can maybe ride around the problems a little bit better, but which is a funny thing to say about Vinales, isn't it? Really, but it's kind of what you'd expect, especially after the sprint race. Aleix was clearly quicker, and especially once the tyre went off, it was clearly quicker. So as he started to catch Vinales up, it did look like potentially he'd be able to get through. And as soon as he overtook him, that was always going to be race over, especially when Vinales went through the runoff. But it was good to see them both going for the win. Great to see afterwards as well, the celebrations. They swapped bikes. Vinales may as well have won the race if you asked him, because he was so happy in second place, which, if we remember last time he had second place behind a teammate, he did not look very happy and then tried to blow the bike up. So yeah, it was great. It was great to see different riders battling for the win as well. Obviously, Aleix has got a win this season. Great, the dynamics of it. Aleix obviously won the sprint race the day before, but to actually get that Grand Prix victory at home, Vinales trying to get his first victory on the Aprilia. It was a good race, to be fair. It was a bit stale in the middle, but that's what you get. I mean, if we're being honest, even Catalunya 2009 was a bit stale in the middle, but you forget that part, don't you? So yeah, to see two teammates going head to head at Catalunya again definitely brought back some of those kind of memories, and it was a pretty good race between them.
Yeah, and
respectful
again,
too.
Yeah, exactly. It was clean, and we know they're very good friends. And obviously, Aleix really tried hard to get Vinales to jump shift at Yamaha to come to Aprilia. So there's always been this dynamic that they've been good friends, they've been close, they've got on well, and we've always wanted to see what happens when they're 1 and 2. It's a Spanish GP. We got the exact scenario that we needed to see, and well, they swapped bikes on the last lap and came back together laughing and joking, and they basically both won the race together. So it shows that no matter how bad it probably could get for them, I don't think anything will break up their friendship. They seem to get on very well, which is good. It's probably helped Aprilia in terms of making an extra step. Obviously, when Maverick jumped to Aprilia, they still weren't there. They were coming, and I think Aleix knew and probably felt that he was about to ride the wave, and it was just coming like their time, and obviously we're really in a hot spot from this year. Is that 2 race wins for them in full races this year? He's won Silverstone, and he won Catalunya
2 full
here.
race wins. Obviously the sprint race win as well.
So
Vinales been on the podium a couple of times, I think. So
yeah, it's even though it's probably been a tougher season overall, they've still had some serious results as well. It's not just all elate. At least last year, Maverick was still kind of underperforming. We were always kind of think, is this elate going over the limit with that bike, or is Maverick kind of still just misfiring? But now they both seem to be on it, and they do seem very close. So it's brilliant to see, really. And again, the home race for them, and it was a nice little battle. It was a shame, really, that when Elate did pass him, that he had to go off the long lap, because maybe he could have tried to snap back at him. Maverick isn't the most aggressive riders, but we could have maybe seen something. It would have been interesting.
He was a bit more aggressive this weekend, in fairness. He did seem a bit more up for it, especially in the main race. He took the lead very early.
So I think Maverick is slowly getting better as becoming the more complete package. He's finally kind of learning what you need to do to be a top elite sportsman at this level. And I think, again, nobody's ever questioned his talent. In my opinion, he's probably, I don't like saying he's top 3 or top 5, but he's one of the best riders out there, and I've believed that for a long time. I just think that he just lacks a small bit between the ears in terms of belief and not even determination. I just think he can get lost. I think he gets within himself too much, and there's too much going on inside, and probably affects his riding, because there was, when he jumped on the Yamaha in 17, he looked absolutely invincible. Obviously that season fell apart for him, but it was scary how quick he was in pre-season and at the start of the season. But it's just, you feel like he can make 5, 6, 7 steps, and then has one bad thing, he can go back 9, and you're like, Jesus, he just needs some sort of consistency. His highs are super high, but his lows then are at the bottom of the bottom. Like, so it's just, he needs to, as he's getting older, it looks like he's probably getting a bit of a control over that. And I think the move to Aprilia, a bit more of in a friendly environment, he definitely seems love there. He seems to love them as well. So everything for Maverick seems to be going well. And I think we both agree, we both would love to see him win a race, and I'd say it probably will come. I wouldn't put it past them going really strong next time out in Misano. Misano's complete opposite. It's a much more stop-start track, very high grip. So maybe see the KTMs there and the Aprilias maybe, and the Ducatis obviously being in Italy. So it's going to be a good race next weekend. But yeah, it's just, again, Aprilias this weekend stole the show in just so many ways. They were quick over one lap. They were quick off the line, which is just amazing to them, because it's just overall their Achilles heel this year has been getting to where they can use their bike. So yeah, it's just been pretty brilliant. But someone who had a decent ride, we've already touched him briefly, Jorge Martin. It was 6th in the sprint, and again it was top of the rest, really, I suppose you could kind of say, for the most of the weekend. Jorge Martin, again, solid points. Again, we did touch on that. He looks like he's lost that 1% extra he had that in qualifying, and looks pretty much a better racer. Probably has a bit more racecraft this season, and his race pace definitely seems to be consistent. Obviously had a bit of a mare in the Austria Grand Prix. I think maybe put himself under a bit of pressure that weekend. He's kind of known for putting himself down with so much pressure, and I think that's kind of what happened in Austria, that he knew his bike was the bike to be on, and probably just tried to force something that he probably should have let come naturally. But what did you make of his kind of Barcelona weekend? Overall, solid points again?
Pretty good. I mean, he's the second Ducati behind Bagnaia. Bagnaia is obviously the reigning world champion. We're saying the fastest rider in MotoGP at the moment. Let's not beat around the bush. He's in the better team out of the two of them, so there is that to it as well. So I think if you look at what Martin is doing compared to Bastianini, for example, the guys that went head to head for that Factory Ducati seat, he's doing a much better job. So yeah, he's doing pretty well. I mean, he was easily clear of the likes of Zarco. Obviously, we'll come on to this in a minute as well, but the two VR46 riders and the two Grassini riders. So yeah, in fairness, it was a pretty good weekend for him. I mean, yeah, Austria perhaps wasn't the best, because he knows he's good at that circuit. Obviously, remember, he got his first MotoGP race win there. He was on pole there in his rookie season. He knows he's on the same equipment now as Bagnaia this season, whereas last year I don't think he ever was very happy about the engine spec that he had compared to the factory guys. So I think sometimes, he probably puts himself under too much pressure because he feels like he's on the same equipment as the world champion, and I bet there is a element of him that wants to prove Ducati wrong for giving the seat to Bastianini, and well, at the minute he certainly is doing that. So I think overall pretty good weekend from him. Sprint race pretty good. Obviously the main race very good because he was running fourth for quite a while. Sort of let Oliveira run his tyre out over to Oliveira. All right, he was a bit off the two Aprilias, but then I think everybody was off the Aprilias today. If Bagnaia didn't high side, he probably was off the Aprilias today. The Aprilias were just so much better. Obviously, he could keep up with them in the sprint, but I think in the main race, I think the advantage they had was just probably too much. They didn't need to use the tyre as much, I don't think, to do the lap time, whereas the Ducati probably did. So, I can't fault Martin. Good ride. And I suppose technically he's made some inroads in the championship since Bagnaia had 0, but not. He was already quite far behind anyway, so it doesn't probably make much of a difference.
Only 2.8 seconds off at the line. We don't think of that like that.
Wow,
that is close. Like, so it really shows.
It was very well ridden race from him. I bet he was further off in the sprint than that. So very good race.
I'll double check the sprint for you. He was in P6, P5, 4.3 off. So you are correct. He was further off in the sprint. So again, just solid weekend. And again, if Pecco does miss Misano, like we haven't confirmed yet whether he is or not. Obviously, being Tuesday recording this, it still isn't really confirmed. I think probably tomorrow when this podcast will go live, we probably will get a statement from Ducati saying he'll be fit or not fit. I'd imagine he would be, considering he was walking.
I think he will be. I think he's probably okay. Probably a bit sore, but I don't think he's really picked up an injury other than maybe some bruising.
Yeah, so like if for argument's sake he does miss another round, that's another, was it 36, 37 points on offer? Is it for a full race?
37 because you got 25 for the full race and 12 for the sprint.
So it's a big margin you can take back, and Ducati's just worn out the race this weekend. We'll come to the others in a minute, the strange absence of the VR46 boys, and it clearly showed over a racetrack that has a lot of long corners, hanging corners. They just still, even with all their aero, all their gizmos, all their tricks and all this, they still don't have that bike that turns, even though they've managed to convince everyone else that they have, and they've managed to fool us into making a turn elsewhere by using other methods. When it comes to natural turning and stuff like that, they just seem to struggle. It just shows how good Pecco did to get pole position, how good he did to get P2 in the sprint. And it was kind of a shame he had his crash in start of the main race, because he probably would have put in one of his best performances this season to can even keep the Aprilias somewhat in sight, really. So it just really doubles down really on how solid Martin was all weekend. So again, if he keeps the position going, I don't think they'll ever switch him around between him and Bastianini. I think they probably have made a mistake in some aspect, because there's just so many aspects and so many difficult opportunities for them they have to change their mind on so many things. They have to make decisions so quickly. I think they had to go with Bastianini last year. They couldn't really promote Martin, but I still just think that Martin has a slightly higher ceiling. And Bastianini's season has been dreadful. Now, of course, it's not been his fault, having the crash in the sprint and having been injured, coming back to the season and not getting on with this year's bike. Everything's just gone against Bastianini this year, whereas Martin is kind of, like I've mentioned about 60 times in this podcast, taking a step back and come forward out of it. He's kind of, like we've mentioned, he looks like he's better over the longer race now, and it's not as much of a hot lap hero, you could call him. He's always been ridiculous over the one lap. Even in, I remember back to his 2017, his championship winning year in Moto3, where he just could do the lap time on his own on that Gresini Honda. He was ridiculously good. So he's never been questioned his talent. It's just whether he can do it over the races. And as of late, he really pushed Pecco in Sachsenring. He really pushed him, and it's a good overall weekend for him, and I hope he kind of pushes on and has a good finish to the season. But we did cover VR46 briefly there. They were nowhere all weekend, absolutely lost. Any any reason why Rhys, other than Ducati probably not being the bike to be on?
I mean, yeah, I don't really know because, yeah, probably the Ducati maybe wasn't the bike to be on, but maybe it wasn't the bike to be on compared to the Aprilia, but there were still only 3 of those. So for them to be battling down with the Yamaha of Quartararo and the Honda of Marc Marquez just really highlights the fact that they were just very strange. I mean, it seemed to be the VR46 team in particular as well. Like the Pramac guys weren't as bad. I mean, I guess Grassini weren't too bad actually. Digi Antonio was having a pretty good weekend actually for him. So yeah, it was just weird. They were just slow all weekend. I don't really have a lot to say about it. They just Marini in particular was very slow in the sprint. He was miles back, but they were a little bit better in the main race. And obviously Bezzecchi was probably a bit wounded after that crash by the sounds of it. So yeah, and I believe Marini managed to beat Bezzecchi, but yeah, they just were slow all weekend. It was just bizarre.
So it's just one of those weekends where it just doesn't click, and to be fair, they've been on such an upward spiral of results and they've been going up so fast since they've come into the class. It's actually strange now when they're kind of where they should be. Like if they're in the top 15 you would class them third. Yeah, you'd put them ahead of Grassini probably just on overall. You'd probably put them. So that's if they're the third best Ducati team, that means they're the 5th and 6th Ducati bikes. So you could easily say where they should be in theory is about top 10, top 12. So when they are down there, it's actually like, oh my god, they're doing so poor this weekend. Bezzecchi's not even in the top 5, Marini's not even in the top 8. So it just shows really how good their season has been overall and how much progress they've made and how strong Marini's become over the races, how he's kind of tied up his race weekends and just the ultra talent that is Bezzecchi. But just it's strange, we just kind of put it in just because we had to kind of cover the fact that it was just one of those weekends where everything they tried went against them. They did kind of recover. I think they learned a small bit from the sprint race, a small bit, just an idea of what they were doing wrong. I think in terms of the sprint race, it gives you a lot of data, and especially on a track where it's so heavily dependent on tire longevity. If you already get to run a 12-lap race at the kind of relatively same time at full pelt, you get so much data, you can just dial the bike, and I think all the extra data from the other Ducatis will probably just brought them slightly forward in Sunday. So they probably just gave them, again, just shows the overall improvement you get from being in that Ducati family. Just everyone makes a step on a Sunday. So again, it's weird, but I expect them to be back on form. If you remember, I think Marini was on the front row in 21 on Misano. I expect Bezzecchi.
Sky bike.
Yeah, I expect Bezzecchi to go well if he wasn't injured. So it should be a better weekend than Misano, but it's just it was just weird to see him again. And again, it probably just shows how well they're doing to the fact that we think that they were down towards the fringe points, that we think that's weird for VR46. But just to finish the podcast, Quartararo, good ride from him, or was it just the fact that big Skittles, a difficult day in terms of tyres? Was it just a kind of a Texas race where everything fell into place for him, or was he actually showing decent pace?
I mean, to be fair, he hadn't really had a good pace over the weekend. Neither had Morbidelli. Morbidelli actually out-qualified him, but that's actually one thing that Morbidelli has done quite well this year, is that he's been a lot closer, especially in qualifying, to Fabio. And in the sprint race, he was miles ahead of him. Quartararo had a really bad sprint race. He was much slower, for example, than he was last season. But in the main race, he sort of turned it round. Actually had a very good race, I thought, because in how far back he started, his pace looked good as well. Probably similar kind of pace he was running last year. Probably was that kind of race-winning style pace. And let's be honest, he should absolutely be nowhere near Jack Miller on the KTM or Alex Marquez on the Grassini Ducati, and he was battling both of them. So, yeah, top job to him. Obviously, didn't see a lot of him, but I just keep my eye on Fabio, obviously seeing where he is. He's usually the lead Yamaha rider. So he had a pretty good start. He got his way up there. He was battling with them, and considering the disadvantages that, all right, Catalunya is probably on the track, so I think Yamaha's going to work a bit better, because, I mean, like we say, it's like a less powerful Aprilia, but even still, I think it was, compared to the sprint at least, it was a pretty good main race ride from him, to be quite honest.
Yeah, and again, all weekend he complained of lack of drive grip, and that the new engine is just, at tracks like this, is really noticeable how bad the power delivery is. So I think if you could look at the fact that, right, it was a slightly weird race on Sunday. We had probably a couple of riders who maybe underperformed, but I think he definitely performed quite well to get that bike into that kind of situation, just to be battling with some of the actual kind of premier class riders of the series these days, and putting Miller under pressure on that bike was interesting to see him back. And again, it's good to see him back because he, again, like, you forget that he's a world champion. He deserves to be up the front, and he's such a talent, and he's been kind of a loss for the last 18 months. It's quite sad to see. So hopefully going forward we'll get more of this, but again, very skeptical, as there's just no Yamaha just don't have any answer for the current regulations of GP, and they're just lost. And everyone's saying it has to be V4 engine. They're saying we don't do V4s. We haven't made a V4 since 90s, I believe, is the last time they made one. So they're not going to completely uproots, change philosophy, come back with a brand new bike, because, like we've mentioned many times, if you start fresh, no matter what project you're doing, your new project is never going to be as good as the current project. The current bike is so dialed in and it's so quick. It's just missing a bit of rear grip, probably a better aero system from front to rear, and maybe slightly, if they can get a bit more out of the current engine in terms of use more of the power. It's clear that they've gotten power this year and it's just not worked for them. It's gone exactly how Davi predicted, where more power, less rear grip makes you go slower. So it's just a matter of just refining a few things and getting back there. They clearly still turn quite well. Now, obviously, with KTM's Red Bull experts kind of getting in on their kind of aero philosophy and getting the bike turning quite well, that's where they've made their gains this year. Ducati have been doing it for about 3 or 4 years now, where they've had all these crazy Venturi tunnels and these crazy aero fairings that making it work. Yamaha probably isn't the king of the corner speed anymore. Obviously, Aprilia seems to just have so much corner speed. This weekend was a real example of that. So they probably need to find places elsewhere they can't rely on rolling through the corner. We've seen for the last, probably, I don't know how many years it's been now, maybe last 4 or 5 years, that even with their advantage in corner speed, if they can't lead, they can't really do much. And ever since Ducati have kind of gotten a storm on the ride height devices and all that, it's really killed off Yamaha, because at least they could run through the corner quick enough, close the gap, and then spring a move in an S section at Mugello. But even now, they can't get out of the corner to get close enough to run that extra corner speed. The gap between the corners between the Ducatis, the Yamahas, the Aprilias have all closed down to the point now where they're all very similar. The advantage is near none anymore. So the fact that they're so struggling with the rear grip and the drive grip, and probably using the overall power of that bike, it's just showing that that's why they're down in Q1 most weeks. And I think this year we've seen what happens. I think it was Massimo Marigali has said before Sunday that when there's so little grip and that they can't use it, the riders tend to brake later and then use less corner speed. So again, they're making it even worse for themselves, and that's just how they feel like they have to ride to make the difference. So it basically, from what Yamaha are saying, is that their strengths aren't really their strengths anymore. The weaknesses are clear, and then to go quicker, the riders are trying to ride and use more of the weaknesses of the bike by trying to square off corners and brake deep. So it's just a mess for Yamaha. I think really this weekend for Honda, we haven't any notes in the podcast about them, but it's been same old Honda really. They've been nowhere. Marquez pulled a lap out in Q1 behind Miller. So again, Honda is just being pulled along by Marquez. It was just a poor weekend from them. But in terms of Yamaha, I think they bring a new aero fairing this weekend, and Fabio said it was much better.
I think it was very similar to the old one they had. So
yeah,
I don't know how many times they've gone back to that.
I know. But next to be bringing up to 16 Lorenzo chassis.
Oh yeah,
but
I bet he's begging for that.
Yeah, crazy old story that. But just to finish off today's podcast, we just want to say a quick word about the unfortunate passing of Paul Bird. Unfortunately, he passed away earlier in the week, and it's just been a tragic story, really. You've just seen, personally, I've seen a lot on Twitter about him, just how dedicated he was to the sport and how much he did for his riders. I've seen so many of his ex-riders come out saying unbelievable paragraphs, pages and pages on Twitter of just how amazing of a man he was. And it was such a shock. We did know in the Cadwell weekend he was unwell in hospital. Nobody knew it was this close. So it was just a shock really for everyone when we heard the news. So it was just it was just a massive shock to the whole bike community because he's been running that team. He obviously at one point in time in the early 2010s had a GP team. Was a very successful rider himself. That actually wasn't all. He was a very successful supermoto. Was a fabulous airline, a helicopter pilot. Was meant to be very quick in four wheels, and it just was just a great kind of father figure to the BSB paddock. Had obviously time in World Superbike as well in GP. Just Rhys, it's just been a tragic loss really for the whole motorsport community.
Yeah, it's been awful. It was a surprise. I came home from work, just went onto Instagram, saw that the team had posted that he'd passed away. I mean, it's one of those things you don't expect because it's not very old. It wasn't very old. Sometimes when these guys do get older, you see it and you're like, oh, you expect it when they're of obviously a certain age, but just it was so young, really. Just massive shock, and like you say, everything the last few days just been nothing but good things about him. How many riders he's helped, so many riders I didn't even know that he'd really even crossed paths with. Just some top flight riders, Jonathan Ray, Scott Redding, plenty of riders in the BSB paddock, even riders they've never raced for him. He's gave them a helping hand, gave them sponsorship and things like that. It's just a massive shame to the whole community. Because like you say, all right, but he's probably best known for being a British Superbike team owner, but he's had stints in World Superbikes and MotoGP, obviously different motorsports as well. So he's just, it's going to be a big loss.
And I suppose on that side note, we will end off today's podcast. We have gone on for quite a bit. If you have enjoyed, drop a like on YouTube if you are tuning in. Of course, rate us a 5 stars if you have enjoyed today's Spotify podcast. We also have comments down below. Leave your feedback there. Something you'd like to see, if there's anything in the podcast you'd like to see changed. Any feedback for us is always greatly appreciated. But that's where we're going to leave it. We will see you next week back on our usual schedule for Misano. We'll see you then. Thanks for listening. See you next time.